Like and subscribe. Chapter 25. Chapter 25. Ui's disbelief. This devil fruit without the curse effect is really tempting. I don't know if there will be a chance to obtain this kind of reward again in the future. Ui, who just ate the fruit, is full of energy and strength. Originally, he planned to go back to wash and sleep, but now he sat at the desk again and continued writing the second chapter of Konoha love story. He intends to complete chapter 2 as soon as possible. When the clock struck 11:30, Ui stretched and casually threw the pen on the table. The efficiency of working from home is really high. He finished chapter 2 in just a few hours. After washing up, he got into bed in his pajamas and soon fell into a deep sleep. Tomorrow will be a new day. When he woke up the next day, he discovered that he was sleeping on his side and wanted to turn over a bit, feeling groggy. But before his body turned over, his hand touched something warm. Feeling the heat of the fingertips, Ui couldn't help but turn around and jump out of bed. Upon closer inspection, he found that there was a woman lying on the other half of his bed. Her eye sockets were wide open, and Ui looked at the familiar outfit and realized that it was Anko who was lying in his bed. But what is she doing here? Ui looked at the person on the bed and couldn't help but exclaim. Anko, who was still deeply asleep, slept soundly on the other side of the bed, with her back violently shaking. She opened her mouth wide, and a stream of drool flowed from the corner of her mouth, wetting a large piece of the sheet. She looked half naked, with her shoulders half exposed, which was very attractive. How the hell did this woman get into his room? That was the only thing on his mind. After all, if Anko could easily get in, any other ninja could do the same, and it would really be a shame if he were killed over this nonsense. Turning his head quickly, he saw that the window of his house was broken. Broken. Fragments of glass all over the place were scattered on the floor. It is estimated that Anko came in through the window. In addition to the catastrophic window breakage, there was also a mess on the floor of his house. The floor was covered with half-eaten food, chopsticks were scattered all over the floor, and 2 bottles of white porcelain wine were lying on the floor, and the wine was also spilled on the floor. After seeing the manuscript he wrote last night on the floor, he stepped carefully on the barefoot floor and quickly picked it up. Fortunately, the book is not broken. Did this person come to his house last night to play and go crazy? Putting the notebook back on the desk, Ui stood in front of the bed, watching the charming woman sleep lazily. Anko seemed to be very sleepy. She closed her mouth with a snap unconsciously and began to snore. In the end, he sighed, rolled his eyes at Anko, and began cleaning up the mess. When the clock on the wall struck 10 o'clock, Anko finally made a move and immediately opened her eyes after humming twice. After supporting her body and stretching her waist, she simply sat on the bed. I slept so deeply. Anko wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and said, I feel a bit cold. Where is the wind coming from? Where did the wind come from? Didn't you create it yourself yesterday? Ui is going crazy. He raised his eyelids and said, Anko-senpai, you are such a noble person that you forget things. Last night, you got drunk at my house. Confused for a moment, Anko stared at Ui's face. Memories from yesterday flooded her mind like a flood, and she felt a little embarrassed. Avoiding Ui's eyes, Anko shamelessly said, nonsense. I'm sorry. I was so excited to give you some news that I didn't think you would already be asleep, so I decided to wait for you to wake up. Ui opened his mouth in shock. He couldn't believe how shameless this woman was. Seeing it in the anime is one thing, but experiencing it firsthand is a completely different story. Anko scratched her hair with an innocent face. I said it wasn't intentional. Why are you so angry? I apologize. Hey, by the way, I came to you yesterday to tell you something important. Anko looked at Ui with more and more shadows on her face and quickly changed the subject. The first episode of Konoha love story Jong. I already voted for Maruzendo, and the editorial manager gave 15% commission. How about that? Upon hearing the news, Ui also diverted his attention, nodded and said, wow, I thought I could only get 10%. After all, this shared model has not been launched yet. Hehehe, it's all thanks to me. Anko raised her head and said proudly, you have to thank me a lot. Thank you very much. Ui's complexion improved with this news and finally smiled, turned around and took out an envelope from the cabinet, threw it to the sitting Anko on the bed, and said, here, this is your part of the mission from yesterday. What is it? Anko, who took the envelope, opened it eagerly, and when she saw the 10,000 taels inside, she pinched Ui's face with one hand. Thank you very much, kid. FY currency ZFY1/2 patreon.com/William777 FY currency ZFY1/2. You can subscribe to my Patreon, which will give you access up to chapter 38. Translating and fixing Chinese grammatical errors and cliches is quite complicated, so your contribution would help me a lot. Thank you very much. Chapter 26. Chapter 26. New task. Anko scratched her face in embarrassment, threw the envelope she had in her hand at Ui, and said, it was my fault last night, so I gave you the 10,000 taels to fix the windows as soon as possible. After speaking, she pinched Ui's cheek hard again. It's okay, I will definitely prepare a big gift for you then. Without any intention of being polite, Ui took the money out of the envelope and then took a step back to save her cheek. Get up and get ready. There are no instant noodles at home. We will go out to eat. Okay. Anko nodded sharply, put her index finger in the center of her lips, and said with a twisted smile, I want to have dango for breakfast. Dango for the first meal of the day was something Ui never thought of. In the autumn streets, there were still people coming and going. Ui grabbed a handful of 3-colored balls, couldn't help but sigh, and stuffed them into her mouth without any choice. Dango is considered a famous food in Konoha village, and it took her a long time to buy it now. However, this is the first time she has tasted this kind of snack as a meal. Yes, it's delicious. Anko was also holding a handful of dango, Tia skate contentedly while eating. Her eyes were curved, and she looked very happy. Looking up and forgetting to look at Anko next to her, the corners of Ui's mouth couldn't help but rise. After getting along well for more than a day, she had a clear idea of Anko's temperament. When she is angry, a pair of hazel eyes will stand up like a dangerous king cobra. When she is happy, her eyebrows and eyes curve, and she smiles like a cat that has stolen fish. Occasionally, she likes to play pranks, but in fact, her mind is very delicate. Hey, little Ui. Anko gave Ui a strange look and said with doubt, am I really that pretty? You've been staring at me for a long time. Ui, who came back to her senses, couldn't help but roll her eyes, nodded one after another, and said superficially, yes, who in the entire Konoha village can compare to the great Anko? No, she is the most beautiful woman in the 5 villages. Anko was surprised by Ui's senseless bragging, completely speechless, and stuffed the dango into her mouth, saying, isn't that a bit unrealistic? Did she really take it seriously? Ui ate calmly to suppress the impact, thinking that such a shameless person is really rare. Ui bought 10 skewers, and Anko bought 15 skewers. Ui, who was sitting on the bench, put her hands behind her head, looked at Anko, who was eating well, and looked up at the sky. Since she came to this world, it took her more than half a month to get to Konoha village from the bamboo village and paid a 2-month deposit with the money she had at that time. In this way, she would have to pay the deposit again in 10 days at most. Because it is in action, the manuscript fee for Konoha Love Story will not be available for a short time, so she can only accept the task and pay the deposit. And, the rent is almost due. Junior Ui, where are you going later? Stuffing the last string of dango that she snatched from Ui into her mouth, Anko said vaguely. Lowering her hands, Ui straightened her body and said, I plan to go to the Hokage building to take on some D-rank missions since I will have to pay the security deposit again in a week. Otherwise, Anbu might kick me out of Konoha village. Security deposit? Anko raised her head in confusion and said, I remember the monthly deposit in the village is quite. If I remember correctly, common people need 30,000 taels and ninja need 300,000 taels. There's no commission for private missions, but if you go to the Hokage building to pick up a mission, you'll have to take 50% of the earnings. Isn't that too slow? If there wasn't a system, it would indeed be very slow. Ui shrugged and said, there's no other way to do this. I'm not a Konoha ninja, so this is the only way. Anko suddenly hit her head and said, the 3rd Hokage hasn't sent me any missions recently. Why don't I accompany you for missions later? Ui's eyes lit up and she quickly asked, is that okay? Of course, as long as you finish writing Konoha Love Story as soon as possible. Anko narrowed her eyes, snapped her fingers, and said, plus, if I'm the one taking on the task, with my identity as a special JA Ringnin, I'll be the one in charge. There's no need to limit the mission level. How about it? If she's lucky, she can take on a B-rank mission and can complete the deposit, and maybe even have some left over. Her current Jinin strength is not good, but it's still possible to tightly hug Anko's thigh. Thinking of this, Ui immediately nodded and said, okay, you can take me to pick up the mission, and after I deliver the deposit, I'll treat you to dinner. Dango, please, Anko exclaimed. Alright, stop talking about dango, we can also eat some grilled food. The two headed off immediately, and just as Ui was about to get up, Anko suddenly said, wait, there's one more thing. What is it? Ui asked suspiciously. She already gave her the 2nd chapter of Konoha Love Story and invited her to eat dango. Accepting the task should be enough. What else could she need? Anko also stood up, then clenched her hands and loosened the joints of her body, and said, what's wrong? Do I have to test your skills? Otherwise, we won't coordinate well in the mission. It's true that Anko doesn't know Ui's true strength, but since she can take on the security task at the campus festival, she's at least at the Chunin level. But to ensure safety, she planned to find out. That's why she had the idea of competing with Ui. Ui nodded, then opened the game map and indeed saw a question mark on Anko, which meant a mission. Ding dong. Triggered task. Learn from each other. FY currency ZFY1/2 patreon.com/William777 FY currency ZFY1/2. You can subscribe to my Patreon, which will give you access up to chapter 38. Translating and fixing Chinese grammatical errors and cliches is quite complicated, so your contribution would help me a lot. Thank you very much. Chapter 27, Battle with Anko. 1. Mission description. Only the strong can survive. As a newcomer who has just entered the ninja world, compete with Anko to determine your true current strength. Mission requirement. In the battle, you have to persist for 5 minutes. Mission reward. Crazy Diamond. Experimental version. It turned out to be Crazy Diamond. Ui was delighted. Crazy Diamond is a stand that can repair anything. The only drawback being that things that lack pieces cannot be repaired. Simply repairing items or bodies, it uses the power of a stand to destroy and give the opponent an unexpected counterattack through repair. Although it's only a trial version, it's still something big. Looking fiercely at Anko, Ui's eyes were full of fighting spirit. Even if the opponent is her, who has elite strength, he still has to persist for 5 minutes. Crazy Diamond, he's determined to get it. Oh, little Ui, are your eyes full of fighting spirit? It seems you're ready, so come with me. Let's find a training ground. Anko lazily said. Seeing Anko ready to go, Ui immediately condensed chakra in his feet. Then the two quickly ran to the nearest training ground. In training ground number 19 on the back mountain of Konoha Shinabai School, a panting sound of hey, hey, hey could be heard, and leaves whispered in the autumn wind. Gay-sensei, 1,000 push-ups have been done. A boy in green tights suddenly stood up and told another adult man who was jumping rope. Ah, Really? Gay panted while jumping rope. Then do 1,000 squats. Let's go. Yes, Gay-sensei, Rock Lee roared excitedly with drops of sweat on his forehead. Two people wearing green exercise uniforms continued to challenge the limits of their physical condition here, swinging their blood. Hatake Kakashi, who had just finished his mission and returned to the village, seeing that the sun was good today, took a copy of Kaka and planned to read it while walking around the village. He walked unknowingly towards the training ground, and it was training ground number 19. When he heard the panting sound of youth, Kakashi froze and was about to run away when a voice stopped him. Oh, Kakashi, let's have a competition between men. Gay, who was jumping rope, noticed Kakashi and immediately threw the rope aside with enthusiasm, and then quickly ran towards Kakashi, stopping him. Kakashi, looking at the sweaty Gay, Kakashi regretted losing himself again in the content of the book, so much so that he didn't even realize he had walked directly to the training ground. Gay, I have something to do later, let's have a fight next time, Kakashi said in a negotiating tone. Besides, you still have to practice with your student. Rock Lee, who was mentioned earlier, stopped squatting, turned his head, showed his white teeth, and said with a smile, Kakashi-sensei, I can do it myself. Gay-sensei just assigned me 1,000 squats and I'm still doing them for a while, so you can rest assured. You don't have to be so sincere. Kakashi complained from the bottom of his heavy heart. He wanted to hurry up and run while Gay wasn't paying attention, but before he had time to start running, another voice arrived. Hey, Kakashi, Gay, why are you all here? Anko saw a familiar face from afar, and as she approached, she said in surprise, didn't you go on a mission? Gay ran his hand through his hair and said, I recently took a graduate class from the ninja school, so I temporarily stopped missions. Kakashi casually put away Kuka, shrugged, and said, I just finished an S-ranked mission and I'm going to rest for a few days. Senior Anko, why are you running so fast? Ui mobilized his chakra to catch up, but even so, Anko was very fast. Ha ha ha. Hearing Ui's pitiful voice, Anko quickly turned her head, stared at him with a thin layer of sweat on her forehead, and said, of course not, it's not my fault, your speed is too slow, breath. Rolling his eyes, Ui looked at Gay and Kakashi, paused, and said, Senior Gay, Senior Kakashi, long time no see. Hey, you finally came out, kid. You've been staying at home for a month. Gay smiled, then pulled Kakashi to introduce him. This is my rival, Hatake Kakashi. Okay, Ui nodded and then greeted Kakashi. Kakashi just returned from a mission, so he never met Ui and is not familiar with him, so naturally, he is not as enthusiastic as Gay. Anko raised her head and told Kakashi and Gay, get out of the way. You two, I want to compete with Ui and test his strength. What to do? Gay was a little puzzled and said, are you going to take Ui on a mission? Yes. Anko tilted her head and said with a smile, depending on his strength, I can decide what level of tasks to accept. After hearing this, Gay and Kakashi exchanged glances, and then stepped back a few steps and stood next to Lee, leaving enough space for Ui and Anko. The two separated at a distance. Anko said, okay, make the first move. I'm afraid you won't have a chance to show your strength if I make the first move. Ui, of course, understands this truth, quickly made seals and shouted, Cage Bunshin no Jutsu. Bang 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 bang. After 6 loud explosions, 7 Ui immediately stood in the open space, facing Anko on the opposite side. Cage Bunshin, Kakashi and Gay, who were watching the battle, were surprised, looked at each other, and saw each other's doubts. You know, because this technique consumes a lot of chakra, it has been classified as an A-rank technique. One even for them, it's complicated, because one doesn't have chakra, and the other doesn't have much reserve. Anko was quite enthusiastic. She laughed twice, with a smile on her lips, and lazily said, the shadow clone technique is interesting. However, it's still too weak. FY currency ZFY1 half patreon.com/William777 FY currency ZFY1 half. You can subscribe to my Patreon, which will give you access up to chapter 40. Translating and fixing Chinese grammatical errors and cliches is quite complicated, so your contribution would help me a lot. Thank you very much. Chapter 28. Chapter 28. Battle with Anko. 2. It's just training. It's just training. 7 voices sounded at the same time, as Ui made a full posture towards Anko, not forgetting to say the last sentence, Senior Anko, please have mercy. As soon as the words fell, the shadow clone of Ui's body ran towards Anko at the same time. In terms of chakra, he was no less than a Chonin, so his movements were still clean. The 7 Ui who ran towards Anko at the same time lunged, while raising their fists at the same time and tried to hit Anko. Kakashi shook his head and said, his movements are too ordinary and he seemed like just a novice. However, it's unexpected that he mastered Cage Bunshin. With his hands crossed around his chest, Gay had no expression on his face. He said lightly, Kakashi, not everyone is a ninja genius like you. Ui's level is not bad. His hand movements are still clean and tidy. Puckering his lips, Kakashi said nothing, just kept watching the exchange between the two. Boom. All 7 attacks from Ui were in place, but there was a sharp pain in his hands and feet. After a burst of white smoke, a wooden log with the height of a person appeared in the place where the clones attacked. Anko's figure had long disappeared. It's the replacement technique. Ui's heart skipped a beat. He dropped the log and then quickly searched around. Hey, kid, I'm here. Suddenly, Anko's voice came from above Ui. Looking up, one could see Anko lightly tapping the tip of a pine tree, looking at him, with her brown coat fluttering in the wind. Shadow clone is a good technique, but a clone is a clone after all. If that's the case, then this confrontation will be over, Anko said as if she was preaching, and suddenly jumped down from the top of the pine tree. Anko, who was still in the air, suddenly crossed her hands and quickly formed a seal. The speed of making seals can be described as dizzying, and Ui didn't even have time to figure out what kind of ninjutsu she was going to use. There was a smile at the corner of her mouth, and when the handprints were knotted, she suddenly leaned back a bit and shouted, "Fire style, great fireball technique." She took a deep breath, gathered chakra in her throat and shot 2 seconds later. Shit. Ui saw the giant great fireball suddenly shooting towards him, and quickly condensed chakra all over his body to avoid being hurt by the high temperature. Chakra itself is condensed, and the chakra that the shadow clone maintains is naturally less. In a short time, 6 boom sounds were heard at the same time, as if a balloon had burst. At this point, he no longer cared about maintaining shadow clone. Simply put, this was the horror of a JA Ringnen. Although he mobilized chakra all over his body to defend himself, it still felt like he was being roasted on a grill. The burning sensation was too real. At that moment, Rock Lee unknowingly stopped his training action. He looked at Anko, who had risen to several meters in height due to the force of the great fireball technique. His eyes were full of envy. He whispered pitifully, "Why can't I use ninjutsu?" Ha ha. Gay patted Lee's melon head, half bowed and comforted him. "Your physical abilities are quite good. Almost no one at the same level can overwhelm you." "No." Lee shook his head and said a little dejectedly, "I challenged Neji and lost ... more than 100 times." Gay. Kakashi didn't pay attention to what these two were talking about. He just shook his head with regret and said, "It's about to end." Then he was a little bewildered. I didn't expect that woman to show mercy. He knew she was holding back, something that those who know this woman would shout in surprise. It's estimated that Ui has the strength of a Jinin. Anko has a sense of proportion, Gay couldn't help but say after hearing Kakashi's words. Shaking his head, Kakashi calmly said, "When have you seen her be kind and gentle? She is that man's apprentice. Don't be fooled by her smile during the week. She has a very cold and sadistic temperament." Anko is Orochimaru's apprentice. She is a rare female ninja genius. She graduated from the Ninja Academy at the age of 10 and qualified as a Jinin, then became a Chonin at the age of 12. At that time, the 3 Sannin had their first generation of apprentices. Jiraiya taught Namikaze Minato, Tsunade took Shizune as her disciple, and Orochimaru took Anko as his personal disciple. One Anko has changed since the day Orochimaru deserted the village. After checking the time, about a minute and a half had passed. If he couldn't hold on, then Crazy Diamond would fly away. Gritting his teeth, Ui immediately used the power of his own fruit and transformed into a beast. After playing with Anko for a while, she already had an approximate estimate of Ui's ability. Indeed, it was the strength of a Jinin. In that case, it's better to take a B-rank mission. A-rank missions are somewhat dangerous, Anko thought as her body fell. Suddenly, a large shadow pierced through the great fireball technique and quickly attacked Anko. At a speed comparable to a JA Ringnen, Anko, who was thinking, didn't notice all these changes at all. In an instant, Ui, in the form of a leopard, had already leapt towards her. Spinning midway in the air, Ui struck Anko with the force of his tail. Indeed, when Anko became aware of her situation, it was already too late to react, so she could only cross her arms in front of her and make a defensive move. Boom. Anko crashed to the ground with a loud thud. This sudden change left Kakashi, Gay, and Lee stunned. Just now, Anko was hit by an animal. This is. Gay looked at Ui in the form of a beast who had landed, and couldn't help but say, "Are you Ui? What kind of ninjutsu is this?" Kakashi's eyes lit up as he saw the previously helpless boy in the form of a 3-meter-long leopard with a bit of interest. He suddenly raised the forehead protector that had been covering one of his eyes. 2. FY currency ZFY1 half patreon.com/William777 FY currency ZFY1 half. You can subscribe to my Patreon, which will give you access up to chapter 40. Translating and fixing Chinese grammatical errors and cliches is quite complicated, so your contribution would help me a lot. Thank you very much. Chapter 29. Chapter 29. Battle with Anko. 3. The moment Kakashi lifted the protector, an injured eye was exposed. His pupil was blood red, with 3 domos spinning around the center. "Huh?" Kakashi. Gay turned his head slightly and caught Kakashi's gaze, exposing the Sharingan. He was a little surprised and said, "Why did you use the Sharingan?" Kakashi was a little startled, and even a little hard to believe what he saw with his own eyes. He said in a deep voice, "Gay, this Ui is not easy." Right now his chakra and physical strength have shot up 5 times in an instant, almost exactly the same as mine. Incredible. Gay froze for a moment and said incredulously, "What? He's just a kid. How can he have so much chakra? Unless, who knows?" Kakashi sighed, heard Gay's comments and thought for a moment, then shook his head decisively and said, "It's unlikely. All beasts have a Jinchuriki now. And, there is no tail beast that looks like a leopard. Judging by the appearance, it does not look like a tail beast." Kakashi's ability to be so surprised is also related to his own amount of chakra. Although he has been known as a genius since he was a child, he has a fatal flaw, lack of chakra. This deficiency makes him really have no advantage in the tug of war. Therefore, Kakashi was genuinely surprised when he saw that the chakra in Ui's body could reach the same level as him, which is basically impossible. After all, even if he has less chakra than normal, he is still an elite JA Ringnen. The only possibility is that Ui has some strange ninjutsu. Kakashi lifted his mouth, showing some interest in this boy. Ui. Ui landed on all fours, smiled, opened his bloody mouth and roared, letting out a roar. It is completely different from animal transformation when chakra is not mobilized. When chakra is mobilized throughout the body, it is like a berserker. The reason his chakra soared is also related to the sudden increase in the size of his body after turning into a beast. Due to the sudden chakra rising, Ui's body felt a slight numbness. Anko, who was repelled by Ui's tail, stood up immediately after landing for a few seconds, and then saw the animalized Uaya standing 10 meters away from her, and there was a trace of surprise. "Is that you, Uaya?" Anko patted the dust and asked excitedly. "So cute." Uaya, focused on the battle, has no intention of talking to Anko. His only goal now is to survive these 5 minutes, since if Anko is serious, he might die in no time. Due to excessive overflow of chakra, 2 layers of weak blue chakra lines are formed around the leopard-shaped Uaya. Anko suddenly raised her arm and licked the back of her hand when she saw it. Her eyes turned into vertical pupils in an instant, smiled dangerously and then said, "Little Uaya, sister must be serious." Before the words fell, Anko attacked Uaya, making seals with both hands. Snake hand. The left hand clenched the right wrist tightly and the right hand pointed at Uaya. 5 wide snakes with sharp fangs suddenly appeared from her hand and opened their mouths to attack Uaya. Uaya, who turned into a leopard and was almost 3 meters long, his speed and agility also increased a lot. When the 5 wide snakes rushed towards him and were about to wrap around him, he immediately turned around and was about to get out of Anko's attack range. "Can you escape?" Ferocious, devastating snakes. Anko's voice suddenly sounded in Uaya's ears, like a ghost. Uaya stared at Anko, standing not far in front of him with eyes wide open, and turned to see another Anko. 2 huge pythons rushed towards him, and one of them wrapped around his body before he realized it. There were 5 wide snakes dripping venom in the front and 2 giant pythons wrapped around his body in the back. Uaya began to sweat coldly. No matter how flexible and agile his body is, the 3-meter physical goal is too big. Without hesitation, Uaya transformed into a hybrid form before their fangs could pierce his body. In an instant, his body shrank to 2.5 meters, and before the python had time to block him, he immediately leaned forward and rolled out of the python's enclosure. Kakashi, who was observing the battle, quickly moved his eyes following Uaya's movements. When he saw Uaya's hybrid form, his eyes shone with surprise and said, "His chakra has dropped, probably around 1/5. What a strange ninjutsu." When Uaya jumped out of the enclosure, his hands quickly formed seals, and he used Cage Bunshin. With the support of powerful chakra, more than 20 clones appeared instantly this time and quickly fled to the surroundings. Anko scoffed and shouted, "Do you still want to escape?" In an instant, Anko summoned various kinds of snakes and quickly attacked Uaya. Uaya, of course, knew that he was not an opponent, so he quickly began to dodge with his skill. Relying on his strength to survive 5 minutes, Uaya focused on defense, fighting and retreating. When he was completely entangled by Anko's latent snake hand, the time had passed 6 minutes. Uaya lay on the ground panting, feeling a little weak. He told Anko, "Senor Anko, that's all I have. Let me go." Anko laughed twice, then extended her hand to Uaya and said, "Come on, get up." When Uaya got up, Kakashi, Gay and Lee came over, and Gay joked, "Kaki, you actually forced Anko to this point." Anko shrugged and said, "The brat has to pay the security deposit for next month. I'll take him to pick up a higher level mission." The 3 nodded inconsistently, still shocked by the battle that had just taken place. "Oh, right." Gay nodded, then suddenly turned his head to look at Kakashi, with a flame in his eyes. He said excitedly, "Kakashi, I just saw the battle between Uaya and Anko. I feel very passionate. Let's have a duel." 1. FY currency ZFY1/2 patreon.com/William777 FY currency ZFY1/2. You can subscribe to my Patreon, which will give you access up to chapter 42. Translating and fixing Chinese grammatical errors and cliches is quite complicated, so your contribution would help me a lot. Thank you very much. Chapter 30. Ino's abnormality. Kakashi narrowed his eyes, looking apathetic and jokingly commented that if he agreed to a duel with Gay it would be endless, so he had to find a way to escape. In the moment he lowered his head to think, Kakashi saw Uaya watching himself and Gay with a kind of watching the show expression. Looking at Kakashi, who had been quiet for a long time, Gay lost his composure, put his right hand on his body, and asked again, "Kakashi, are you afraid to fight?" "Anko, Uaya, I don't know if I can join the mission. Hokage-sama hasn't assigned me a task recently. I want to go out and do some activities. If I get used to being lazy at home, my body will become stiff," Kakashi said in a tone of consultation. As a former member of Anbu and Elite JA Ringmen, Kakashi only accepted tasks assigned by Hiruzen himself. This time, he returned to the village and did not receive any instructions from above, so this lie may sound convincing. Anko immediately raised her eyebrows upon receiving the message, then nodded directly and generously said, "Okay, if you're here, it will save me from worrying about not being able to take care of this brat alone. Hee, why don't you have time?" Uaya had already discovered these small tricks in his heart. It is estimated that Kakashi just wanted to get rid of Gay, and after leaving the training field for a while, he probably separated. Gay looked at Kakashi with a little disappointment and said, "Oh, it's a pity that I missed another chance to beat you." Uaya. Kakashi, who wanted to get rid of his friend, didn't care, just nodded quickly and told Gay, "It's a pity, wait until next time." Gay, who sees Kakashi as his lifelong opponent, is a little disappointed, but he is not the kind of person who bows his head. Suddenly, he took a step forward, patted his chest, and said seriously, "Anko, Uaya, let me join this task. It turns out that I'm also free recently." Anko, Uaya, Kakashi. The determination to duel Kakashi is really extremely determined. Uaya thought in his heart, then looked at Anko's difficult face, and almost laughed out loud. Pulling on Anko's sleeve, Uaya cleared his throat and dryly said, "Elder, let Master Gay go with us. If you take on a more advanced mission, you learn more money, and I can spend time doing something else." Anko immediately received the signal, nodded her head at Gay quickly, and said, Okay. Guy immediately jumped up excitedly. Kakashi looked at Anko, who nodded and agreed with a stunned expression. The tacit understanding between them had now completely disappeared. TSK, women are really fickle, he thought helplessly. Originally, he planned to escape in a while. Forget it. He rolled his eyes. He was a little desperate. Rock Lee was stunned for a moment until he realized that everyone here, except for him, was going on a mission. He immediately shouted to Gay, "Gay-sensei, take me with you. I also want to go on a mission." Gay stopped, looked at his eager student, patted his head, and said sternly, "Lee, your current strength is not enough." Yesterday, after you, Shikamaru, and Changji left Ino, it was quite a scene in the Yamanaka and Eris's room. Holding the small package of bento boxes, Ino opened the wooden door, took off her clogs, and shouted, "Atasan, Okasan, I'm back." Putting the load on the living room table, after greeting her father and mother, she walked barefoot to her room, looking very worried. Yamanaka Inoichi, who was in the living room having tea, looked at his wife in confusion and said innocently, "What's wrong with Ino?" "Something is wrong. Should we go see her?" Mrs. Yamanaka also seemed worried, placed her index finger in the center of her lips, thought for a moment, and said, "Let's take a look. This girl is not usually like this." After returning to her room, Ino didn't even have time to change her clothes and lay down on the soft bed, covering her face. "I was so abnormal today, especially when I met that woman Anko who stayed with you all the time. I felt uncomfortable in my heart and then felt a series of jealousy. The key is that Shikamaru and Changji saw it." You're not Sasuke, okay?" Ino couldn't help but hit the bed with her fists. Her whole face was flushed, as hot as a steam oven. It was too embarrassing. She lay on the bed with some desperate words. Inoichi and his wife, who eavesdropped at the door, couldn't help but knock and enter Ino's room, saying, "Ino, we're coming in." Atasan, Okasan, why?" Upon hearing the voice, Ino immediately sat up and turned to look at them. The Yamanaka couple entered and saw Ino, who was lying on the bed, quickly got up, her face as red as an apple. Yamanaka Inoichi touched her head and said with concern, "Ino, what's wrong? Do you have something? Are you sick? Why is your face so red?" Ino, Mrs. Yamanaka, who was silently standing aside, saw some clues and suddenly reached out and pushed her husband out, and said to Ino with a smile, "Ino, we're leaving." After speaking, she kindly helped Ino close the door. Ino pouted and said, "What just happened? Hey, don't pressure me, don't pressure me." Yamanaka Inoichi still wanted to struggle to walk back and said excitedly, "I have to go see what my precious daughter has." FY currency ZFY 1/2 patreon.com/William777 FY currency ZFY 1/2. You can subscribe to my Patreon, which will give you access up to chapter 42. Translating and fixing Chinese grammatical errors and cliches is quite complicated, so your contribution would help me a lot. Thank you very much. A PayPal Eduardo.Ricard1@icloud.com. You can make donations to my PayPal and that would help me a lot too. Chapter 31, embarrassed Ino seriously. Mrs. Yamanaka couldn't help fiercely poking her husband's heart with her thin index finger, and said with some disdain, "Haven't you understood, Ino? She's in love." What? Inoichi's expression became incredible, as if he had eaten shit. His complexion became a little pale, and he looked at his wife with a smile, stuttering and said, Couldn't, Ino. She just went to a school festival. How could she be in love? I think she's just interested in that boy from the Yakaya family." Mrs. Yamanaka could only roll her eyes at her husband's stupidity and murmured, "You really don't understand girls' hearts. This morning, the girl took 4 lunchboxes and yours too. Remember?" "I remember." This morning, when he heard that his daughter was taking a lunchbox for a good friend, his heart almost broke into pieces, and tonight was even more uncomfortable. Looking at his wife stiffly, Inoichi asked in an almost desperate tone, "This was the lunchbox for that boy named Uaya?" Nodding docilely, hiding her long yellow hair behind her ears, Mrs. Yamanaka remembered, "Yes, it's Uaya. Let me tell you that Uaya is a good boy." Not listening at all to what his wife was saying, Inoichi turned around stiffly and walked towards the living room in a daze. He needed a cup of tea to calm down now. Over the past few years, he had protected his little cabbage, loosened the soil and fertilized it, cared for its growth, and when he saw that the little cabbage was about to be grabbed by a pig before it was ripe, as a father, how could Inoichi not feel overwhelmed? "Hey, Inoichi." Mrs. Yamanaka looked at her husband's back, unable to help sighing helplessly with her hands on her hips, and murmured, "Seriously, isn't it normal for a little girl to think about spring? HMPH, if I hadn't taken the initiative at the beginning, where ... Gradually, they moved away. Ino felt relieved when she heard the voices outside the door getting smaller and smaller, but the blush on her face remained intact. At this moment, the father and mother did not deliberately lower their voices, so those words also fell into her ears, and her whole face seemed to be on fire, feeling embarrassed. She vented her anger again, stood up abruptly, then grabbed her pajamas and ran to the bathroom, planning to hurry up and wash before going to bed. Yes, just sleep. As long as she was asleep, none of this could haunt her thoughts. However, what Ino never expected was, turn back, sleep, wake up. She kept staring at the ceiling with her eyes open and pulled the quilt up to her face, leaving only a pair of eyes. In the dark night, Ino, who has been sleeping on time since she was a child, when the alarm clock rang, the tightrope in her heart was about to break. Dazed, she went to clean up, then stared at the 2 super big dark circles and finished breakfast under the watchful eyes of her father and mother. "I'm going to school." After Ino finished her breakfast, she weakly greeted the two, then put on her backpack and started walking towards the door. Are you okay, Ino? Mrs. Yamanaka looked at the little girl's apathetic look with some distress, and couldn't help saying, how about I go to the ninja school to ask for permission for you? Ino turned around, gave her mother a forced smile, and said, it's not necessary, Okasan, I can handle it. Mrs. Yamanaka wanted to say something, but she found a generous palm suddenly appearing on the back of her hand. She tilted her head and saw her husband shaking his head towards her, and changed her words when they reached her mouth. Then okay, come back early. Hi. Last night she was thinking about why she acted so strange, and why Uaya was getting so close to that woman. What is the relationship between the two? All of this was tangled in her mind, and she really couldn't sleep all night. Walking down the path, she lowered her head and fiercely sighed. It was really uncomfortable to feel dizzy and confused. The Yamanaka family is a large family throughout Konoha, so they divide a large area of the village. However, the disadvantage is that the house is a bit far from the ninja school, and Sakura's house is very close to the ninja school. When she turned the corner, she ran into the distressed Ino. The street is not wide, so Ino naturally ran into Sakura, was a little surprised, and then walked towards the school. If it were normal, she would definitely go up and say something, but today she really doesn't have the strength. Sakura felt strange, but didn't think it was a big deal. The two have become enemies because of Sasuke. HMPH, Ino must be pretending to be sick to get Sasuke's attention. Sakura thought. Ninja school, Class S classroom. In a tiered classroom, before class started, the girls in the class were always chatting around Sasuke, competing for the wind and jealousy. But the only difference today is that Ino did not argue with this group of girls. Ino sat next to her two friends, Choji and Shikamaru, leaning on the table and resting with her eyes closed, intending to rest well, ignoring the eyes of others until Ruka arrived. FY currency ZFY 1/2 patreon.com/William777 FY currency ZFY 1/2. You can subscribe to my Patreon, which will give you access up to chapter 45. Translating and fixing Chinese grammatical errors and cliches is quite complicated, so your contribution would help me a lot. Thank you very much. A PayPal Eduardo.Ricard1@cloud.com. You can make donations to my PayPal and that would help me a lot too.